This video is sponsored by War Thunder. William Coughlin. It was May 28, 1993, when 26-year-old William Coughlin, with a newfound passion for caving, decided to visit a cave in Kentucky with his friends James and Kevin. The cave was divided into two sections: the historic tour, which was accessible to most visitors, and the more dangerous wild tour, reserved for experienced and daring people. After completing the easier historic tour, the guide asked if they wanted to proceed with the more challenging wild tour. Once they agreed, they were required to sign a document acknowledging the risks involved and absolving the operators of any responsibility. This should have been the first red flag, and Kevin decided to opt out, returning to the safer area. The remaining group, now consisting of William, James, and 4 other participants, was led by the guide into the wild tour. He stressed the importance of staying close and reminded them of the potential dangers. As they descended into the lower sections of the cave, they encountered a 30-foot hanging cable ladder with wooden rungs. After climbing down and going a bit forward, there was a second, shorter ladder. At the bottom of the second ladder, the guide informed the group that the official tour had ended. He mentioned they could explore nearby passages if they wished, but noted that they were running behind schedule and that he needed to step away briefly for a phone call. He left the group at the base of the ladder, and this is when William decided to explore a passage he had noticed earlier. He discussed it with James, who agreed, and William attempted to climb back up the second ladder. However, the climb proved difficult. He was 6 feet tall and weighed 220 pounds. Struggling to ascend, William decided to wait for the guide instead. As time passed and the guide didn't return, William attempted to climb the ladder again. Tragically, halfway up, he lost his grip and fell violently, striking his head on a protruding rock before landing hard on the ground. Blood began pooling from his head, and James rushed to help him. Although William remained conscious, he was delirious and visibly stunned. When the guide finally returned, he instructed the group to climb back out the way they came. However, William's condition made this impossible. James, frustrated, demanded the guide call a cave rescue team, but the guide dismissed the idea, insisting that the group work together to get William out. James began to suspect the guide was avoiding involving authorities, perhaps to prevent panic among other visitors. The group decided their best option was to bypass the second ladder entirely and take an alternative route through a narrow, previously mapped corridor not part of the official tour. With teamwork, they managed to navigate the initial section, carrying William with them. However, the real challenge came when they reached a rough, sharp V-shaped passage, which made gripping difficult. When it was William's turn, he went in head first, but his size made it an extremely tight fit. Halfway through, he became stuck and realized he couldn't move forward or backward. Trapped in a horizontal position with his arms pinned beneath him, he began to panic. The tightness of the passage compressed his chest, making it difficult for him to breathe. The group's attempts to pull him out were futile. As panic set in, the guide instructed James to exit the cave and inform the owner of the situation. James rushed to the surface, but the owner appeared reluctant to involve authorities. The guide, finally recognizing the severity of the situation, went out to get a medkit and to call for emergency services. It took 3 hours for rescue and medical personnel to arrive. Meanwhile, James stayed by William's side, trying to keep him calm, but William's responses grew slower and more slurred until he eventually stopped responding altogether. When rescuers reached William, they faced immense challenges. The downward angle of the passage made it difficult to revive him. They brought in heaters to protect him from hypothermia and began evacuating the rest of the group, leaving only James behind to witness what was happening to his friend. A pulley system was installed to try to free William, but every tug caused him immense pain, so much so that he once again started groaning in agony. The rescue team worked tirelessly throughout Saturday, but after 17 hours of efforts, William was tragically pronounced dead. It took an additional 7 hours to extract his body from the cave. I wanted to take this segment to announce today's sponsor, War Thunder, which makes videos like these possible. If you don't know, War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and it's also available for free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. It has an incredibly wide range of choice, with over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships of 10 major nations, ranging from biplanes and armored cars of the 1920s to the fighter jets and main battle tanks of today. Not only are the vehicles incredibly detailed, but the whole game, with its realistic graphics and authentic sound effects, is incredibly immersive. To be honest, it's the best game for fans of military history. My favorite feature is the in-depth customization, with countless camouflages, historical markings, and decorations for all types of vehicles, including community-created ones. You can join the 70 million people community in epic PvP battles by using my links in the description or in the pinned comment. If you've never played before or you haven't played for at least 6 months and you're on PC or console, then when you sign up using my link, you'll get a massive bonus pack with multiple premium vehicles, an exclusive vehicle decorator called the Eagle of Valor, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium account. However, this bonus is available only for a limited time, so you have to be quick. Thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Hermit Cave Incident. It was April 5th, 1999, when 21-year-old Robert Kennedy from Oklahoma set out on what was supposed to be a normal overnight camping trip near Hermit Cave. He was accompanied by two others, his stepbrother Richard and their mutual friend Ben. During the night, they gathered around a campfire and discussed the nearby cave, sharing legends and stories about its mysterious reputation. The next morning, as they were packing up to head home, their curiosity about the cave got the better of them. The cave was largely unmapped, adding an air of intrigue, so Robert proposed a quick exploration. Ben, however, had to leave early for work, so he headed back home, leaving Robert and Richard to decide for themselves. Robert and Richard entered the cave through its relatively large main entrance without much difficulty. Inside, Robert spotted one of the rumored side passages they had been talking about and decided to explore it. The narrow passage was too tight for more than one person, so Richard decided to wait outside the cave. Robert promised not to go too deep and assured Richard he'd be back soon. As Robert crawled forward, he encountered a section of the cave that was about 150 feet long and full of tight curves, making progress challenging. The real trouble began when he reached a particular point, called the Keyhole Formation. This section was especially dangerous because it was impossible to exit legs first once passed. Unaware of this, Robert continued forward, but when the passage narrowed even further, he decided it was time to turn back. Returning to the Keyhole Formation, Robert realized something terrible. He couldn't pass through it feet first. His only option was to move forward through the even tighter crevice, hoping the cave would widen enough beyond it for him to turn around. What he didn't know was that the crevice sloped downward at a 30-degree angle. Exhausted, Robert squeezed through the space, exhaling all the air from his lungs just to fit. After several pushes, he reached a horrifying realization. He was stuck. Gravity was working against him, and every attempt to move only worsened his situation. Desperate, Robert began yelling for help, but Richard, waiting outside the cave, couldn't hear him. Worried after some time, Richard ventured into the cave by himself, though he had no flashlight because Robert had taken the only one. Crawling in complete darkness, Richard called out for Robert, who immediately yelled back, letting him know he was trapped and struggling to breathe. Realizing he couldn't reach his stepbrother in the pitch black, Richard left the cave to call for help, and about an hour later, a team of 10 rescuers arrived and began assessing the situation. The primary problem was Robert's location. He was trapped in an extremely deep area, approximately 150 feet from the cave's main entrance. This meant that drilling a shaft from above wasn't an option, so the only way to reach him was through the inside of the cave. The rescuers themselves began experiencing breathing difficulties due to the tight space, so they installed a ventilation system to pump warm air into the passages. Only one rescuer could work at a time due to the cave's tightness, and armed with manual tools, they began trying to widen the keyhole formation. However, the lack of space severely limited their maneuverability, and time was running out. Robert's breathing became more difficult, and he eventually stopped cooperating, making faint gurgling sounds, a sign of potential suffocation. After hours of effort, the rescuers managed to excavate through the keyhole formation and reach Robert's feet. Though unconscious, they felt a faint pulse, which gave them enough hope to try to get him out as quickly as possible. They immediately tried to pull him free, but unfortunately, the attempt failed. A pulley system was considered, but the cave's limestone and gypsum walls were too fragile to support the tension. With no other options, they continued digging around his body, which took an additional hour. When they finally freed Robert, they rushed him outside, where paramedics were waiting. Tragically, it was too late. After 5 hours of relentless rescue operations, Robert Kennedy was pronounced dead. Black Cave Tragedy. In April 1995, Thomas Edward Benning decided to visit Black Cave in Arizona. Having explored the cave before, he felt confident that this would be a relatively safe trip. He entered the cave alone, equipped only with an electric miner's lamp and no helmet. The first part of the cave was familiar to him, and he navigated it without any issues. However, at one point, he noticed a secret side passage that caught his attention. Drawn by curiosity, Thomas strayed from the main route he usually took and began exploring the darker, narrower passage. After venturing deeper into the unfamiliar passage for some time, Thomas decided it was time to turn back. But to his growing concern, he realized that an hour had passed and he was completely lost. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't retrace his steps to the familiar route. As panic began to set in, his situation worsened. His lamp started to flicker and eventually went out, leaving him in total darkness, miles underground. With no source of light, Thomas turned to his last resort, a box of matches. Striking one, he managed to create a faint glow that barely illuminated the rocks around him. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He continued forward, using one match after another, but the matches burned out quickly, and soon he ran out entirely, leaving him once again surrounded by absolute darkness. Despite the circumstances, Thomas refused to give up. He devised a plan to leave behind small, useless items as markers to avoid circling back to the same spots. Starving, dehydrated, and utterly exhausted, he pressed on until he encountered the fissure, a narrow crack in the rock barely 4 feet deep. Believing this might be his only chance to reconnect with the familiar route or find a larger opening, he decided to enter it feet first. As he lowered himself into the gap, his hips dropped below the narrowest point, and he suddenly realized his mistake. He was completely wedged. His hips were firmly stuck between the rock walls, rendering him immobile. Using every last ounce of his strength, Thomas tried to lift himself back up, but it was no use. He was now trapped, alone, in the dark, with no one able to hear him. Days passed, and Thomas remained in the same position, growing weaker with each passing moment. Back home, his wife grew increasingly worried when he failed to return. She contacted the police, who began an extensive search of the caves in the area. Unfortunately, Thomas hadn't told anyone exactly which cave he planned to visit, leaving rescuers to search blindly. Miraculously, rescuers eventually spotted his car parked near Black Cave. A rescue team entered the cave, carefully exploring all the mapped sections. They found some of Thomas's belongings, including his glasses and shirt, but they missed the secret side passage he had ventured into. Amazingly, Thomas was still alive at this point, though his condition was rapidly deteriorating. Days passed, and with no further progress, authorities unfortunately called off the search. Thomas was officially declared missing. Refusing to give up, his wife continued pleading with authorities to resume the search. She distributed flyers around the city and reached out to anyone who might have information, but unfortunately, she wouldn't have known about her husband for a long time. It wasn't until December 1996, over a year and a half later, that 3 other cavers exploring Black Cave stumbled upon Thomas's remains in the dark, narrow passage where he had become trapped. Zacaton Sinkhole Incident. On April 6, 1994, diving legend Shek Exley, the first person in the world to log over 100 cave dives, set out to break a new depth record. His goal was to dive through the Zacaton Sinkhole in Mexico, one of the deepest water-filled sinkholes in the world, plunging over 1,000 feet. Shek's passion for deep diving began at a young age when he and his brother would compete to see how deep they could go. Tragically, during one such competition, his brother lost consciousness at around 50 feet and drowned. Despite this, Shek pursued his love for diving, becoming an expert. For context, the average diver is advised not to descend deeper than 150 feet, with 300 feet considered the absolute limit for experienced divers. Accompanied by fellow diver Jim Bowden, Shek meticulously prepared for the record-breaking dive. The event drew TV reporters, who wanted to witness this extraordinary feat. As the 2 divers descended into the Zacaton sinkhole, they wished each other luck. Although diving together, their dives would be independent. Exley had trained for this attempt, pushing his limits in previous dives. During one preparation dive at Bushman's Hole in South Africa, however, something weird happened. He reached an astonishing depth of 863 feet, but experienced alarming symptoms. He began hallucinating, and his body trembled uncontrollably, which are classic signs of high-pressure nervous syndrome, or HPNS. HPNS typically manifests at depths beyond 500 feet and is believed to result from the compression of cell membranes in the central nervous system. The condition can cause confusion, tremors, and even hallucinations, making it incredibly dangerous for divers at those depths. To mitigate these risks, Shek and Bowden planned to descend slowly, carefully switching tanks as they reached new depths. For the first stretch of their dive, everything went smoothly. However, problems began to arise at around 800 feet. Bowden noticed slight trembling in his hands, an early warning sign of HPNS. At 900 feet, Bowden encountered another issue. His air supply was running critically low. His tank pressure had dropped to 1,080 psi, far below the expected 1,800 psi needed to ensure a safe ascent. Keep in mind that decompression, depending on how deep the divers go, can take up to hours, which meant that Bowden was now in a life or death situation. Realizing the danger, Bowden began his ascent immediately, hoping he could make it back to the surface in time. Exley, however, was in even greater trouble. At around 880 feet, his vision blurred, and his body began trembling uncontrollably. HPNS symptoms, combined with nitrogen narcosis, which is a condition akin to being drunk caused by high-pressure nitrogen, began impairing his ability to think clearly. To steady himself, Exley wrapped his descent line around his arms, but his symptoms worsened, causing him to breathe more rapidly and deplete his air supply at an alarming rate. In a desperate move, he switched tanks, but at such depths, this was not ideal. Disoriented and overwhelmed by his symptoms, Exley became unable to think straight or move. Bowden, ascending cautiously, noticed Exley's descent line with unused tanks still attached. While concerned, he assumed Exley might have successfully reached the sinkhole's bottom and was making his way back up slowly. However, on the surface, the support team grew suspicious. They observed bubbles rising to the surface, but only from one diver, Bowden. A support diver, alarmed, wrote on an underwater slate, "Where's Shek?" She decided to descend to 250 feet to investigate. At 280 feet, she spotted something chilling: two small white squares hanging from Exley's descent line. Upon closer inspection, she realized they were pages from Exley's diving profile, tools he had used to meticulously plan his dive. The realization was devastating. Sheck was stuck somewhere deep below. Nearly 10 hours after their initial descent, Bowden miraculously surfaced, surviving his own life-threatening dive. Exley, however, a hero that had previously saved numerous other divers, remained in the depths of the Zacaton sinkhole. 3 days later, the recovery team pulled his descent line to the surface, bringing Exley's lifeless body with it. Jim Bowden reached an extraordinary depth of 915 feet during the dive, setting a world record for open-circuit scuba diving. Again, thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play it for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, or mobile by using my links in the pinned comment or video description. Remember, new and returning players that haven't played in 6 months will receive a massive bonus pack across PC and consoles, including multiple premium vehicles and other goodies. It's available for a limited time only though, so make sure not to miss it.